Hello, everyone. Welcome to this launch of the NORRAG Special Issue number 9, Foundational Learning, Current Debates and Praxes. I see that everyone's joining the room now, so we are going to wait 2 minutes so that everyone can join the room. While we are waiting, I would like to highlight a few technical aspects of this webinar. Next slide, please, Camille. Due to the room size, all cameras and microphones are disabled. Also, I'd like to share that we are recording this session in order to make it available for people who could not join us today. Also, please kindly note that closed caption for this event is available in different languages. You can enable it and choose the language of your preference by clicking the Show Captions icon on the bottom. Also, please also note that interpretation is available for this webinar in Portuguese. Please enable interpretation by clicking the icon on your Zoom interface and click the language of your choice. For Q&A, please write your question at any time during this webinar using the Q&A box. You can also indicate your support for particular questions by clicking a thumbs up button in the Q&A box, which will also help us select the questions for discussion. If you experience any technical issues that you would like to communicate with the host, please feel free to share them in the chat box, and we will be able to answer and address your concern as soon as possible. Please kindly note that if you are interested in asking questions to the panelists, you should enter the questions in the Q&A box, not necessarily the chat box. We wouldn't be able to see your questions in the chat box. And next slide, please. This is the information that I just shared in English, but they are written in Portuguese. I'm going to pause shortly for those who would like to read the written instruction in Portuguese. Next slide, please. Next slide. One slide before this. Okay. Today's webinar will follow a certain program that was shared before the event. After my welcome, I will hand the floor over to Hugh McLean, the guest editor of this special issue, for his introduction of the special issue. Hugh is the senior advisor of NORRAG. He has compiled 28 contributions from 78 authors across the world that shed light in the process, challenges, and understandings of foundation learning. His presentation will be followed by 5 presentations from NSI 9. Then Carrie Facer, Professor of Educational and Social Futures at the University of Bristol, will share her insights as the discussant. And after that, we will open the floor for a Q&A and discussion with the authors. During this event, if you would like to share your thoughts on NSI 9 or highlight any main points you hear in the events on social media, these are the hashtags that you could use, but of course, feel free to use the ones that resonate with you the most. If you like, also please follow us on X, and this is our X handle at NORRAG. And I invite you to follow to check out our latest events and publications. Next slide, please. At NORRAG, we plan and organize our strategic activities to enable our stakeholders to know what robust evidence exists, amplify knowledge that is context relevant, access underrepresented knowledge relevant to their work, and finally, ACT, meaning that they work with context-relevant knowledge and expertise to formulate priorities and solutions. And reflecting our strategies to co-produce, surface, and broker critical and particularly underrepresented knowledge in international education and training, NORRAG Special Issue was launched with the ambition to provide prominence to authors from various countries and with diverse perspectives. And each issue focuses on the current debates that frame global education policy and international cooperation in education. And this very issue, NSI 9, focuses on the issue of foundational learning. Next slide, please. At NORRAG, we have 5 thematic focuses. The first one explores how can data and evidence support the inclusion of marginalized groups in learning. The second one examines how does equitable and quality education overlay and intersect with other SDGs. The third one investigates how do innovations and disruptions improve access, equity, and quality in education. And the fourth theme explores how can private sector approaches in education uphold access, equity, and quality. And the final thematic focus is about the network, where we focus on further surfacing and amplifying underrepresented expertise, particularly from the Global South, and deepening and extending our outreach and partnerships. And among these thematic focuses, this particular issue falls under the education and the SDGs theme of the NORRAG strategy. Next slide, please. I invite you to check out our work and explore our network further by joining our network if you are not already a member. Please scan this QR code to join our network map. I'm going to pause shortly for you to be able to scan the QR code. And now, without any further ado, I would like to hand the floor over to Hugh for his introduction. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chang-Wong, and hello, everyone. Are we on? Can you hear?
Yes, we can hear you.
Great, okay. Today is International Day of Education, actually, and I think it's very fitting today just to pause and think about the attacks there are on education around the world, particularly in Gaza, but in fact everywhere. And of course it's appropriate on a day like this, as it is on any other, for us to think about what is foundational learning, why it matters for education, and why it matters for our whole lives. And this special issue, which I had the great and immense pleasure to edit. You just go to the first slide there, Camille. This special issue that I've had the great pleasure to work with the authors on. Many of you are here today, so hello to all of you. We learned a hang of a lot on this together, I hope. We laughed a lot. I certainly did. We probably cried a lot too. But it's an incredible product, I think, because it draws on deep experience of the network around the world on foundational learning. Right from the favelas of Brazil and the Brazilian jungle, we have a Portuguese audience today, and this is translated into Portuguese simultaneously. So a very, very big welcome to all of you. Through to early learning in the Philippines, decolonizing education through indigenous stories in Africa and their use in school, and fabulous contributions on climate, 2 of which are featured today. And also right out of the formal education system, education in prisons, and looking at the experiences of forest kindergarten and children learning out in the wild all year, snow and shine, on their basic foundational skills at the early childhood level. So there's an enormous wealth of experience here. And it's very exciting for us to be able to present this today after all of the work. So what does it show us? Oh, I think I should just say before we go on that I think we do need to acknowledge that the emphasis on foundational learning, it's as old as the hills in some ways, but also relatively new. The new emphasis comes, I think, from the emphasis of donors and funders and their interests in education. And in some respects, that has slightly, I think, emphasized the debate in the field, but it's the reason that it's so prominent, and particularly with the intervention of the Gates Foundation and the World Bank, they focus on learning poverty. All of these things provide the background for why this has become such a prominent discussion. But in fact, we discover through the contributions to this issue that teachers, of course, have always been working with foundational learning, and that it's been fundamental to education and the work of educators right from the start. So if you go to the next slide, three of the things I think that really debates that came through for me were firstly that if we look at these debates in the international scene, I think we've seen that they tend to polarize. And this hasn't been quite helpful. We end up with two camps of people thinking about whether or not foundation is narrow or whether it's broad. And the contributions to this special issue show that this is largely an unproductive debate and not one that really reflects what's going on in practice, because educators obviously find ways to do both, as they must and as they inevitably will have to. And the other thing I think that this really emphasized for me was the notion of crisis. And we draw on a quote from Janet Reutemann here, and I'll read it, I think, because it's so profound for the discussion. And of course, we're really delighted to have Carrie Facer with us today to think through the futures of foundational learning with us at greater depth. So Janet Reutemann asserts that crisis provokes a moral demand for a difference between the past and the future, and that what we designate a crisis is always a political choice. It forecasts our apprehensions of history, the future, and the past, and these are consequently, because of the idea of a crisis, that these are negatively framed. And these persistent crisis-centrist perspectives limit and constrain our options, not only about the present, but also our thinking about the future. If you move on to the next slide. So what then is foundational learning? And if we look at it in the narrower sense, of course, the World Bank will tell us that foundational learning is linked to learning poverty. And that, of course, ends up with an indicator, which is learning poverty is, I think that's school deprivation plus 1 minus school deprivation times learning deprivation, which is a simple way of saying it's about schooling and learning at the same time. But is foundational learning just about numeracy and literacy? Or is it about social and emotional skills plus foundational numeracy and literacy? And then what is the role and purpose of whole child development? What do we mean? What does that mean for resilience and durability in education? The contributions to the special issue open up all of those questions. And of course, all of them sit, I think, on the edge of that quite fundamental question. What does Praxes tell us that, in fact, debates do not? And if you move on to the next slide, Praxes certainly does tell us a few things, and these are laid out quite nicely in the articles. And I think the first thing is that despite the emphasis in policy on foundational learning, educators, of course, find that it's not feasible to teach only literacy and numeracy. It's linked to absolutely everything else. And so it's a bit artificial in a way, even though they do need a specific focus, but it's artificial to think that they happen on their own and not in a way that's related to anything else in education. And of course, practice shows us that the teachers, like the sisters, are doing it for themselves, that they're finding ways to navigate these different, perhaps, emphases that they need to have in the classroom, dealing with the immediate needs that they see in front of them, but also the demands of the curriculum. And I think the third thing that really comes through for me, that foundational learning, in fact, is quite fundamental in all pedagogy. It's not only something that is to do with learning in its foundational stages, but as the articles show us, foundational learning is something that is fundamental to teaching. And at each stage that you teach something, you need to think of the foundational knowledge that has come before. So the insights I think it provides us in the next slide then, Camille. There were two essential insights and new ones for me, I think, coming from the wonderful contributions to this special issue. The first is that it doesn't really do to think of foundational learning just as one thing, and that's something basic at the beginning of learning. And in fact, there are three different kinds of, there are probably more, but at least three that were suggested in the contributions to the special issue. I'll call them foundational learning 1, 2, and 3. The first one is the kind of intrinsic learning, in fact, that all animals have. Essentially, it's unstructured. It's what we learn from families, what we learn from our communities. It's what we learn in the home. We learn it in early childhood at a phenomenal rate, but we also learn it right through our lives. I live in Almaty, have done for the last 2 years. I've learned a lot about the city. I haven't been on a course. All of that has been foundational learning for me, but it's been intrinsic. And it's taken a while for that knowledge to seep in. But when it does, it's profound and it's not forgotten. The second kind of foundational learning, I think, is the one that we always think of. Foundational learning, too, is the extrinsic, if you like, but essentially structured, the formal learning that we do through classes. And it's not only for cognitive competencies, it's for everything, physical competencies, aesthetic competencies as well. Anyone who's done sport or something like the piano knows the amount of skill that is involved, the basic foundational skill that is involved at every level, and how you have to build on those to go forward to further stages. And then the third approach or set of ideas about foundational learning, I've called foundational learning 3. And this, in fact, combines foundational learning 1 and 2, but it refers to the higher competencies that we learn in education and how everything through iterative processes and cumulative processes, everything is based on what we have learned before in foundational learning 1 and foundational 2. Teachers handle these differences and different aspects of foundational learning instinctively, I think. Even the intrinsic foundational learning, foundational 1, has a great part in the classroom. Teachers understand that quite well. So this was the first thing for me. The second, if you go to the next slide, the second, I think, really interesting thing for me from the contributions is that it forces us to reconsider, I think, our assumptions about learning outcomes, what they are, particularly learning outcomes related to foundational learning. And there's a lot of profound things here from the articles. First of all, that learning outcomes are generative, not static. They're about what we don't know and how we engage what we don't know, rather than how we remember what we do know. Secondly, learning outcomes are internalized and durable. I hope I'm not going to forget anything I know about Almaty while I'm here, perhaps if I go away for a long time, but there needs to be a durability about a foundational skill. It's not something that you learn and forget. If it's going to be a foundation for everything, it needs to be solid and part of your reflexes, and something that is not forgotten. Thirdly, learning outcomes are not about competition. Foundational learning skills are about collaboration. They remind us that learning is socially constructed. And that's very, very important for the way we go through our lives, helping us to collaborate, to work with others, to build societies together. And those are crucial skills that we develop at the foundational level. And fourthly, they involve competencies that are interlinked, that are continuous. They're not discrete. We tend to test for discrete things. We think numeracy is separate from literacy. And of course it is at one level. But at another level, it's not. It's very much bound into everything we think and do. And the skills that we use in one basic competency are extremely relevant for another. So they're artificially divided. And a lot of educational approaches and pedagogies, of course, combine them in ways that are really exciting for pedagogy and very useful for children. And I think, lastly, that foundational skills and the learning outcomes they're not only about technical proficiencies and competencies, but in fact, they're about aesthetics, they're about emotions, they're about dispositions, they're about how you get on with everyone. And these are completely crucial for the learning experience in school. So those are just some of the things that we touch on in this quite fantastic special issue. I'm very pleased we have the 5 contributions today from 5 of the contributors. They 5 from 28. We could have had many others, but obviously one has to choose. And I think they will give you some indication of the range and depth of this publication. And I can only hope that they will entice you to go to the website and download the whole version and have a look at it. So thank you very much, and especially to the authors. Thank you so much for your hard work to this special edition. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Hugh, for your informative overview of NSI 9. And also, I greatly appreciated your discussion on the 3 modes of foundational learning. So as Hugh just mentioned, building on his introduction, now we will present the video showcase of the 5 contributions. Each contribution is from one section, one part of the publication. So the publication consists of 5 different parts, and we invited the authors from each part so that you can have a big picture about what kind of contributions are included in this issue. First contribution is from Anurag Shukla. He is currently a director with the Brahat Education Foundation. He has been a public policy researcher for a decade now. And he aims to understand the school system better and how policy changes are shaping the system. The contribution that he co-authored is titled Reimagining Foundational Learning in India, Challenges and Prospects for Equitable Implementation. Next slide, please.
Welcome to a journey through India's educational landscape. In this presentation, we will explore a critical aspect of educational discourse today, namely foundational learning and its impact on the broader goals of the National Education Policy of 2020. Like many nations, India faces what is commonly referred to as a learning crisis. And this reckoning has prompted a crucial shift in educational priorities and focus. The National Education Policy of 2020 places foundational learning at the forefront of its agenda, aligning with the Sustainable Development Goal number 4. This strategic move aims to build the essential blocks for comprehensive education, knowledge, and higher order skills. Now, as good as it sounds, the excitement surrounding foundational literacy and numeracy, or FLN, is not without its share of challenges. To start with, there is a lack of clarity or consensus on what constitutes foundational in foundational literacy and numeracy. Unfortunately, popular and policy discourses around what is foundational often entail a very narrow interpretation, emphasizing decontextualized drills and meeting minimum academic standards. We argue that this narrow focus of FLN can compromise the quality of education and create inequitable learning environments. Because it is predominantly in India's government schools which serve the most disadvantaged children that are today shaped by such limited notions of educational quality focused on basic literacy and numeracy. As teachers and educators ourselves, we have seen how ideas such as the pursuit of curiosity, joy, and meaning have come to be considered too ambitious or inefficient to pursue for a majority of India's children. The second area that we engage with is how FLN is implemented. We see that the push for FLN in India adopts a mission mode approach. Within such an approach, efficiency and compulsive action are prioritized over any sustained reflection on a host of issues. For example, how we got here in the first place, or how we could avoid repeating the mistakes of the past. We argue that within this frame of compounded urgency, educational problems are prone to be misinterpreted, where, for instance, we mistake the symptom for the cause, and solutions to be misidentified. The FLN policy's prescriptions for holistic and joyful learning echo many of the ideas from earlier education policy documents, in which case we ask ourselves, what tells us that these lofty intentions will translate into meaningful practices in schools this time and not devolve into empty drills and rituals in the classroom? We then look at the promises and challenges in the Government of India's Nipun Bharat mission, which is the National Initiative for Proficiency in Reading with Understanding and Numeracy. It was launched to prioritize foundational learning, but its implementation today faces a host of challenges. For example, limited resources and bureaucratic complexities hinder the effective training of teachers within stipulated deadlines. The allocation of funds is lopsided, with a substantial portion directed towards teaching learning materials rather than teachers' professional development. As we explore the cracks in the Nipun Bharat mission, we also highlight how it replaces successful early childhood initiatives and disrupts established programs with serious consequences for underserved communities and schools. We conclude our article with a critical realization that for Nipun Bharat to succeed, it must address challenges related to resource allocation, teacher training, program design, and inclusivity. Only then can it lay a robust foundation for children's education journeys and fulfill its mission.
Thank you so much. I would like to remind everyone that we have the Q&A box enabled. So if you have any questions during the webinar, feel free to ask those questions in the Q&A box. And we have our panelists with us today who will join us in the Q&A session later. And they might be even able to answer some of the questions in the Q&A box directly during the webinar as well. I already see that some of the questions are entered, but I wanted to remind everyone that there is a Q&A box in case you have any questions. The second contribution is from Özge Korlu. She is a policy analyst at the Education Reform Initiative, where she primarily oversees data-centric studies and designs monitoring strategies. She has led the coordination of the Education Monitoring Report of ERG twice, a key project in analyzing the Turkish education system. And the contribution that he co-authored is titled Lost in Pisa-lation, the Limits of Measuring Gender and Poverty.
Hello, I'm Özge Korlu, a policy analyst at Education Reform Initiative in Turkey. Today, I'm honored to present our article, Lost in Pisa-lation, the Limits of Gender and Poverty. In addition to myself, our article is co-authored with Melis Cin, Ali İlhan, Ozan Can Özdemir, and Yeliz Düşkün. Our work critically examines the limitation of large-scale assessment like PISA in addressing complex issues of gender and poverty in education. The PISA reading literacy framework not only aims to enhance students' proficiency in engaging with text for knowledge acquisition and societal participation, but also seeks to improve their competence in science and mathematics literacy. Therefore, it's a critical foundational skill, regulating all other critical skills. Many countries, Turkey included, actively participate in global scale assessment like PISA to gauge the literacy and numeracy proficiency of their students and evaluate the efficacy of their national education systems. However, we question whether this international assessment can truly capture the comprehensive educational landscape. Our investigation into PISA reveals a critical oversight in its gender-focused analysis. Despite noting girls' superior literacy achievements, PISA fails to explore the underlying causes. We critique this gap, highlighting a disregard for the nuanced interplay of gender dynamics and poverty, and echo Eileen Unterhalter's sentiment on immeasurability of certain educational aspects. The measurement of gender equality in education has traditionally focused on parity in performance. Our data indicates that girls' confidence and enjoyment in reading correlate with higher literacy scores. Yet, PISA's approach doesn't account for the complex social and educational factors at play, nor does it provide insight into the structural and societal pressure that shape learning environments. Similarly, poverty in education extends beyond material deficits, encompassing a broader spectrum of socioeconomic and cultural factors. Although PISA uses indices like ESCS, our analysis suggests it falls short in measuring the effective use and distribution of resources, raising questions about the genuine contribution to quality education and the presence of biases in learning materials. We conclude that gender equality and poverty in education are too complex to be distilled into simple metrics. International assessment like PISA risk homogenizing diverse education systems and obscuring the nuanced inequalities they aim to address. Our findings call for a re-evaluation of how gender and poverty inequalities are interpreted and measured. Thank you for joining us. We extend our gratitude to Aydın Doğan Vakfı for their generous support and funding, which was instrumental for our analysis of PISA 2018 data. Through our article, we aspire to champion for assessment methodologies that truly reflect and serve the diverse educational needs and realities.
Thank you so much, Özge. Our third contribution is from Adam Roberti. Adam Roberti is the executive director of the Javier Cortara Foundation in the United States. He also leads an interdisciplinary research team specializing in climate migration and retreat at the University of Miami, where he was recognized as a 30 under 30 honoree by the university in 2023. The title of his contribution is Foundational Learning and Socially Engaged Art in an Era of Overlapping Environmental Crisis.
Hello, my name is Adam Roberti, and I'm excited to share some of the key insights from my paper, Foundational Learning and Socially Engaged Art in an Era of Overlapping Environmental Crises. As we find ourselves at this precarious juncture in human history, it's incredibly important that we reimagine education for the generations that have to grow up navigating the consequences of our actions and inaction. It's in this context that we really need educators to empower students as creative collaborators, not just receivers of information. In my piece, I dive into the work of renowned Cuban-American artist Xavier Cortada to see how he's done this by focusing on two initiatives, the Reclamation Project and the Underwater Homeowners Association. Xavier, could you tell us a bit about the Reclamation Project and how you used art as a way of educating so many people about the plight and importance of mangroves?
I created the Reclamation Project to inspire a generation of environmental stewards here in South Florida. I walked participants to a mangrove forest and immersed in that natural beauty. They understood the importance of wetlands. Then, collecting some mangrove propagules from that location, we created installations on the retail storefronts of shops in a barrier island where mangroves once grew. These vertical nurseries sparked conversation and dialogue, teaching people about the importance of wetlands, but also created seedlings that we then planted on Biscayne Bay, creating ecosystems above and below the waterline.
Awesome. Now let's shift gears to another impactful initiative, the Underwater Homeowners Association. Xavier, you started this project to make sea level rise something that people couldn't ignore. Could you share how you've engaged communities, including thousands of students, in sparking action around sea level rise?
I created the Underwater HOA to engage my neighbors in a problem we're all facing, sea level rise. I wanted to make the invisible visible, so I had them write their elevations on yard signs that they would place on their very home and spark climate conversations with their neighbors across the street about how many feet above sea levels their homes were. We also had high school students paint the intersections of the neighborhood with the respective elevations of that intersection so people could begin to visualize the threat of rising seas in their community.
These initiatives highlight the intersection of socially engaged art and foundational learning. They showcase how participatory, purpose-driven experiential learning can cultivate individuals with ecologically aware worldviews and instill foundational skills like curiosity and self-efficacy. Socially engaged art can become a powerful tool in fostering teamwork, leadership, and creativity, really instilling confidence in participants as they see their ability to contribute to collective efforts. I also touched on the importance of aesthetics in foundational learning, as it's something that can be transformative. Aesthetic moments often evoke a deep sense of meaning and emotional connection. Xavier's visually striking eco-art installations challenge aesthetic curiosities, and clearly there is intrinsic value to enriching young imaginations if they are to envision a future that is better than the ones they're likely to inherit. Overall, my contribution is advocating for creative approaches to foundational learning. It emphasizes the potential of socially engaged art to engage people in unexpected ways and explore collaborative opportunities and really develop the commitments and capabilities needed to sustain life on Earth. It's my hope that educators and policymakers are encouraged to explore socially engaged art as an effective tool for inspiring meaningful and purpose-driven learning experiences that resonate with the challenges of our time. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much. And the visual demonstration of the initiatives that were discussed in the presentation are also included in the publication. For our next contribution, I would like to remind everyone that the interpretation is available in English and Portuguese. So you can enable interpretation by clicking the interpretation button on the Zoom interface, and you can you can choose to either listen in original audio, interpretation off, or you can choose to listen in English or Portuguese. Our next contribution is from Rita Potiguara and Renata Montichiari. Rita Potiguara is the director of the Latin American Faculty of Social Sciences. She was a counselor to the Basic Education Chamber of the National Education Council. She also held the positions of General Coordinator of Indigenous School Education and Director of Education Policies for Rural, Indigenous, and Ethnic Racial Relations in the Ministry of Education. Renata Montichiari is a researcher at the Latin American Faculty of Social Sciences, Brazil, and editor of Cadernos Flaxo. She works on issues related to cultural production, cultural diversity, human rights, culture and education, heritage, and museums. The title of their contribution is the Maria Venancio Indigenous School of the Tremembe of Almofala, Intercultural Basic Education and the Fight for Indigenous Land. Thank you.
Eu sou Rita Potiguara, eu sou do povo potiguara do Ceará, do Nordeste brasileiro. Sou professora da Educação Básica, da Educação Superior e atualmente estou diretora da Faculdade Latino-Americana de Ciências Sociais.
Olá, eu sou Renata Montichiari, sou doutora em Antropologia pela Universidade Federal do Rio de Janeiro. Sou pesquisadora da Faculdade Latino-Americana de Ciências Sociais, a Praxes Brasil.
O artigo ele resulta de uma experiência de pesquisa coordenada pela Praxes Brasil, em que um conjunto de pesquisadoras indígenas da educação do campo, das escolas quilombolas, das escolas de fronteira, fizeram um mapeamento das experiências comunitárias, no campo da educação, desenvolvidas pelas próprias comunidades. Essas experiências resultaram em um importante material, foi feito um mapeamento dessas experiências, está disponível para o público no site chamado praxeseducativas.org.br.
A Escola Maria Venâncio está localizada numa região em disputa, um território que grandes empresas têm interesses comerciais naquela região. Então, posicionar a escola nesse lugar permite transmitir às gerações atuais o vínculo daquele território com as famílias, com a população, com a etnia Tremembé naquele lugar. Então, ao mesmo tempo que valoriza e legitima a etnia Tremembé, cria a oportunidade para a comunidade ter um espaço público de conexão e de vínculo com aquele território. Esse estudo demonstra como os Tremembé têm sido capazes de incluir no currículo da educação básica a sua história e a sua cultura. Incluir o que é importante para eles, uma educação que não mude a cara deles, como eles gostam de dizer, que inclua os seus ritos, a sua medicina tradicional, a sua forma de ver o mundo. E é uma prática educativa muito inspiradora para outras escolas indígenas, mas também para as escolas urbanas.
Agradeço a oportunidade, para que a gente esteja aqui participando desse evento e convido a todos vocês a lerem o artigo que fala dessas experiências Tremembé nos contextos educacionais aqui no estado do Ceará.
Thank you so much. Our final contribution is from Christina Gua, as she's a social scientist and policy analyst with expertise in girls' education, 21st century skills, and youth empowerment at the intersections of gender, education, and climate change. She is also co-editor of Curriculum and Learning for Climate Action, towards on SDG 4.7 Roadmap for Systems Change. The title of her contribution is Climate Action and Climate Justice, Foundational Learning in the Climate Crisis.
In 2019, I learned that there would be climate strikes around the world, including one in Washington, D.C., where I was working. At the time, my oldest daughter was in kindergarten and was already well aware that taking care of the planet and of all the Earth's amazing creatures is an important thing to do. She was also coming into the awareness, probably due to the nature of her mother's work, that the people and animals and plants that she loves are at risk of endangerment because their habitats are changing rapidly due to global warming. I asked her if she was interested in joining a very large group of strangers who all cared similarly about the Earth and who all wanted to tell our country's leaders that it was time to take actions that would protect the Earth and its future generations. She asked reluctantly, would I have to miss school? The protests, after all, would be held on a Friday, and what kindergartner wants to miss a day of kindergarten? After I told her that I would be sure to check in with her teacher and her school principal, she felt more at ease that she would not be missing out on any major fun. However, in my attempt to do the right thing as a parent, I was disappointed to receive a response from our principal that my daughter's absence would not be excused because participation in such walkout events was not permitted, even if as demonstration of civic engagement and climate action. Indeed, our school principal was towing the line of our school-county system, which was not excusing any student in the county to participate in the climate strikes. For me as a parent, a concerned citizen, and as a social scientist working at the intersections of education and climate change, this moment of disconnect was a jarring and frustrating one. It was a reminder of how decision makers shaping the education sector continue to cling to outdated priorities and to outdated notions of what foundational learning is. It was also a reminder of how far we need to go as a sector to treat the climate crisis as the planetary emergency that it is. Today, 4 years later, and 5 years after the first Fridays for Future climate strikes, I pick up on this sentiment in my contribution to the NORRAG Special Issue to interrogate the dominant agenda surrounding foundational learning, an agenda that has perpetuated systems complicit in the climate crisis. When we look to youth activists, we can see how their actions reveal a need for a set of skills and knowledge beyond literacy and numeracy that are foundational to thriving and flourishing in a climate-impacted world. These young people are challenging the fossil fuel industry, they're highlighting environmental injustices, and they're demanding transformative climate education. They're demonstrating that what is foundational to learning in a world gripped by climate emergencies is the capacity to act and to seek climate justice. In my essay, I attempt to take inspiration from these young activists to reflect on how climate action and climate justice are two pillars of foundational learning. As the first pillar, climate action as foundational learning is like nurturing a seed. It starts with instilling curiosity, awe, and care for nature in the early years, and then strengthening learners' roots in the ground or in the soil through play-based learning, and then guiding their growth in later stages of learning and development with project-based experiences. Throughout these stages, teachers play a crucial role and must be supported. The second pillar, climate justice as foundational learning, involves understanding the root causes of climate change, and perhaps more importantly, the root causes of the unequal impacts of climate change felt by the most vulnerable members of society and the most structurally excluded communities and countries around the world. In my essay, I attempt to channel the demands of young people for bolder climate action by calling for education decision makers to adopt a new green learning agenda that redefines education, in the words of Greta Thunberg, as if our house is on fire, and raises the ambition of our foundational learning agenda to one never seen before, one that views foundational learning through the lens of climate action and climate justice, and therefore one that is capable of reshaping the trajectory of the Anthropocene. Thanks for letting me be a part of today's launch event, and thank you for checking out my essay.
Thank you very much. Based on these wonderful 5 contributions, now I would like to invite Carrie Facer for her discussion. Carrie Facer is a professor of education and social futures at the University of Bristol. Carrie's research focuses on the relationship between education and futures. Her work in educational futures has seen her partner with organizations like the BBC, the UK's Department for Education, and many others. She leads the British Academy Times of a Justice Transition Global Convening Program. She is also a co-investigator at the ESRC's Center for Socio-Digital Futures. She was also a member of the UNESCO Futures of Education Commission Expert Advisory Group. Carrie, please take the floor.
Thank you. And it would be lovely to be able to see my fellow presenters today, if you're happy to join. It's always a bit strange speaking into the void. So firstly, I'd just love to say thank you for the invitation to really engage with this work. It's very exciting. Hugh, in his introduction to the special issue, he describes the publication as an invitation to a dinner party, where serious ideas get to be discussed from different angles. So I'll try to play the role of a good invited guest. So first of all, thank you for the invitation. And I am very appreciative of the food for thought. There is so much there. It's a very wide range of ideas on what counts as foundational learning. It's an incredibly exciting mix, and I do encourage everybody to have a look at it. I mean, one of the things that I found particularly helpful, Hugh, in your introduction and that you made today and in the paper, is really an attempt to create a mature conversation that can handle ambiguity, that can handle differences of opinion. So rather than getting locked in this battle of it's either this or this, I hear you saying it's both and, it's this and. And that to me feels like a really important foundational shift for this conversation, that we try to start asking ourselves the question, what does foundational learning look like in all of its complexity? A good guest also listens. And this is what I feel like I heard from the presenters today so far. I heard from Christina that thinking through climate justice and climate action can help us learn together, to help us learn with our students what it means to live in a warming world. From Ozge, I heard that assessment really needs to reflect diverse educational needs and realities, and this standardized international frame tends to flatten difference, tends to not engage with what's happening at a local level. From Hita and Hanata, I heard the most astonishing story of how a school can be a site for powerful connection with territory. And from Adam, I was thinking of Maxine Green's work on the social imagination, crossed with David Orr's work on the ecological imagination. I heard all of this, the huge creative potential that gets unleashed by participatory, purpose-driven learning. And from Anurag, I heard a really, really important insight, namely that if we understand foundational learning under this heading, just the basics, that the risk is that it will always be the most vulnerable and marginalized who get the basics, a kind of thin gruel, while others get a rich learning experience. So I heard a huge amount, and again, I encourage everybody to read these. But like a good guest, at least in my household, a guest brings something to add to the feast. So I'm hoping that I can share some thoughts. And I want to think about really the sorts of what I would call foundational changes we are part of in the world today. Now, at the moment, quite often I can hear that the conversation around basic education and foundational education can often start from a question about wealth and inequalities and how to address these, which tends to end up, if we're not careful, in just a prescription for more school and the idea that we either level up or we level down. And Hugh, in his introduction, talks about the limits of this. So I want to start somewhere else. I want to suggest that we're engaged in two fundamental transformations. Firstly, we are living in a rapidly and disruptively warming world. This is bringing radical disruption, deep uncertainty, and a need to work out together how to prevent it getting worse. And then also how to think about how do we live in that? And how are our young people going to live in that? And secondly, we are also dealing with rapidly and disruptively changing technologies that are bringing with us to us new forms of intelligence and new ways of knowing. And both of these together, I think, come from different angles to ask us a really fundamental question. What does it mean to be human? What does it mean to be human in a world, firstly, that's reminding us that it is awake? Amitav Ghosh, the great writer, talks about the sudden rediscovery of the fact that we live on a lively planet that is bringing with it different ways of knowing and thinking. We're not alone. We are part of something bigger. But also, what does it mean to be human in a world where our machines can look through our history, can look through our historical resources and feed it back to us in neat summaries, where our machines become better pattern matchers than we are, when they can prescribe solutions that we cannot understand, and where very rapidly we will be able to talk to them and to listen to them, and they will talk to us. These raise fundamental questions about the nature of the literacy and numeracy we need. And I'm not even going into the sorts of changes that we're starting to see in terms of biotechnologies, which start to potentially bring in really radical questions about what human augmentation might look like. So for me, both of these developments, the shift to an environmentally attentive world and the shift to the sorts of technologies we're living in, they really profoundly trouble who we think we are. What does it mean to be human? And the consequence to that, to me, is to suggest that there are two other Fs that it might be interesting to talk about today. Firstly, friendship. How do we support survival in times of radical uncertainty? For me, it comes back again and again and again. I've been looking at futures for a really long time now. And the one guaranteed way of surviving critical change and uncertainty is the recognition that we live in community, that we build friendships with each other. So I suppose one question to me is really, how is our foundational education helping us and our young people learn that we are part of a community, and that weaving and reweaving these communities is both our birthright and our obligation? If we think about this matters in economic terms as well as in kind of philosophical terms. What does it mean to build unions in an environment where we've got changing machine intelligence? But the second and really important F that I think is worth thinking about is fallibility, frailty, foolishness. One of the things that makes us human is that we make mistakes. And it's precisely in making mistakes that something new comes into the world. It's precisely in making mistakes that we build relationship with each other. Frailty, fallibility, failure, to me, are absolutely core parts of what it is that it's important for us to learn at school. We are not our machines. We are, in John Moriarty, the astonishing Irish philosopher's terms, he says we are vulnerable to experience. And becoming vulnerable to experience is precisely the joy of what it means to be human. And then I also want to make one last comment, really, which is that we can get stuck in particular timeframes. We can see a particular crisis at the moment. And actually, I'd like to invite us to think about maybe we're living in a past future. We're living in a crisis, a radical disruption, and a shift that is still playing out that we need to make sense of. And this is the one, I think, that goes to the heart of a lot of the epistemological conflict and tension that we have today. And I think we're still living with a long revolution of the consequences of Darwin telling us that we live in deep geological time. and a science that promotes the idea that God, a particular Western God, is dead. So when I read this question, when I read this collection of papers, when I think about foundational learning, I wonder where spirit and religion and meaning are in these conversations. What times do we think we're living in? And with whom? How do we locate ourselves in time and space when we live in both geological time and when we live in the detailed time of a micro interaction with the environment that we're part of? What's the cosmology we see ourselves as belonging to? And this to me feels really important if we look at so many of the conflicts around the world. These are conflicts in values, conflicts in accounts of who we are, what it means to be human, what we believe, how and where we think we're going to be redeemed. And I don't pretend to answer these questions here. This is not where I'm going. But I want to suggest that if we think about a foundational education that recognizes we are part of long revolutions, that recognizes that the question of humanity is at the heart of what we've got to do, then really all of our numeracy, our literacy, our creative practice, our participation, I think have to help each child entering our world ask the questions, who am I? What am I part of that is bigger than me? What does it mean to be human in this bigger world? And what does it mean to be the sort of human that I am, with the talents I've got, with the loves I've got, and what can I contribute to this world? I don't know about the rest of you, but I see a huge hunger for meaning and purpose amongst our young people. And I think there is a profound question for us today is how does foundational learning help our students generate that sense of meaning and purpose? And how does it help them understand what it means to be alive today? That's where I finish.
Thank you very much, Carrie, for sharing your interpretations and reflections on the contributions and also raising critical questions. And before we actually move on to the Q&A and address the questions from the Q&A box asked by our participants, I want to actually open this floor to our panelists, addressing some of questions that Carrie raised in her discussion. Hugh, I know that you actually, when you started editing this entire issue, you engaged with Carrie's work and concept, and I'm pretty sure you have some thoughts and comments in response to some of the comments that Carrie just shared. Would you like to address or comment on certain things?
I mean, this goes beyond the dinner table into drinks and afters, I think, Kerry. But thank you for that. Yes, foundations and the future. I mean, foundations in a way are all about futures, right? Because we build there a lot of the instinctive responses, the knowledges, the relationships that we actually need to find our way through this world. And I think, what we've seen in this is the importance of the social construction of knowledge. It's something you pick up from everyone. You can apply yourself in any particular skill. I don't think we should ever knock that. I play the piano, and I know from how difficult it is in order to get something right, you have to make every mistake that it's possible to make in order to get it right. And then some. You don't get it right without ever making mistakes. You have to go through the whole litany of them. And I think all knowledge is like that, actually. We need to fail and fail and fail again to get something right. And this does need to be part of the learning experience. But also, I think any of us who look back on our friendships and our relationships honestly, they involve a lot of failure as well, failing ourselves, failing others as human beings. And this is where we do need a kind of vulnerability and the ability to acknowledge this. I think we do have to say that, in the spaces, the personal spaces, certain types of failure are possibly more acceptable than others. I think we should be a lot less tolerant of failure of those we invest into office. I think we should be getting rid of them pronto when they fail. And often they fail because they insist that they're right all the time against all history and all evidence. So I think there's a space for it. There's a space for failure, but there's also a space for accountability. And this is what our education needs to help us navigate. The difference between those tender, more personal spaces, but actually we really need to be hard and more demanding in the responsibilities and accountabilities that people hold.
Thank you, Hugh. Adam, would you like to respond or add a few comments?
Yes, thank you. I think I really want to touch on the lack of meaning and purpose, and that's what Carrie was talking about, the hunger that these young people have for that. And I feel like I see that, of course, in the young people, but in older populations as well. I think it's kind of a society-wide issue, and it's compounded by the fact that we are this information-rich, time-poor society, right? We are, and I mean, I don't want to speak just for the West, but all around the world, with the rise of screens and social media and technology and virtual reality, it's really hard to facilitate conversations around critically important topics such as education or climate change or whatever. And so, how do we begin to make change in a way that is equitable? How do we begin to bring folks to the table who are not typically having these types of conversations? And that's where I feel like I come from a background of environmental science and policy and climate communications, and I felt like 5 years ago when I learned about Xavier's work, Xavier Cortada, the artist based here in Miami, that he was doing something that I found was incredibly innovative, this socially engaged practice that allowed, just regular, neighbors, community members, athletes, musicians, people who are not talking about sea level rise, bring them into the conversation. So I feel like when it comes to the meaning and the purpose, it's connecting people to things that really matter to them. And it's learning from them in the process, because when we are doing these projects, for example, it's never about these are the solutions. It's how do we come together, figure out what really matters to us, and then how can we go from here. And so I think when you approach it from the community, from going as grassroots as you possibly can, I think that people are generally very receptive and generally are appreciative that their thoughts and concerns are being taken into account, and they feel like a protagonist, and that's always very exciting. And I feel it drives these kinds of conversations even more.
Thank you. I think one of the important message that Carrie highlighted in your discussion is how does foundational learning really help us generate meanings and purposes, right? And I wonder, and I'm trying to drawing on some of the questions asked by the participants too. But Özge, going back to your contribution regarding PISA, which is one of the international large-scale assessment, how do you think that this greater emphasis on international large-scale assessments, including PISA and also PERS, pointed out by one of the audience members, how does that really help us understand foundation learning, and how that actually shape us or influences regarding the generation of meanings and purposes?
So first of all, we all have to say that these international assessments are really important to getting the data about foundational learning and the systems. But we also highlighted that we need more on this for mixed research, like qualitative and quantitative, as we address in our article too. There are some missing points that is crucial for improving the foundational learning, for making it more inclusive in terms of gender and poverty basis. And when we're talking about more meaning, and what you said about that is that we most of the time thinking this as a whole concept that every children can have it. But in terms of inclusivity, we should more about how different the type of situation affects children, how different characteristics of children affect getting this improvement, getting this insights from the foundational learning is about the most crucial part of the scale. And also, we have to say that the international assessments like PISA and PEARLS, as it asks in the question, is a really important policy tool for countries to adopt some strategies. And most of the cases, these are used as part of countries' way to legitimize or sometimes frame their own policies without any further details about this inclusivity or actual needs of the children. One of the recent examples we see in the PISA 2020, we write about PISA 2018, but one of the highlights in PISA 2022 is that Turkey has a success in all this throughout the years in the PISA. There's a simple explanation on the data side, which says us that in Turkey, the coverage rate is increased and also the success level is stayed the same. So in terms of, I'm a quantitative analyst, so in terms of this database, it's a really success, but PISA doesn't say to us how this is achieved in the country, what policies, what wide interventions are in the way of achieving this kind of policy, and how can you apply it in elsewhere? These are the missing points of the story we are trying to discuss. Today, my co-author, Ministrin, is also here. Maybe she wants to add something else to what I'm saying.
Thank you so much, Özge. I think you have really framed it very well, our concern. But when you look into PISA, what you see is that PISA has a comprehensive approach to foundational learning that extends beyond basic literacy and numeracy, and it also includes critical engagement with diverse information, knowledge formats, skills for analyzing, questioning, connecting with text and personal experiences, even understanding of students' engagement with global challenges that we very face today at this time of the year. But what is happening is that although these are all parts of the foundational learning in PISA and PEARLS, what we don't see that they don't necessarily evaluate these challenges at the fullest scale. They are not necessarily looking into nuanced differences, nuanced inequalities, and how these are mitigated across different settings or how they are played into different skill sets. So it gives kind of a very homogenizing overall a brushstroke picture. But then we don't get to know about the real localities. And that's where the real stories lie, right? That's what matters as well.
Thank you. Kiri?
Yeah, I'm very, very interested in this question about how we create a way of assessing learning globally that recognizes diversity. So one of the things, if we think about futures, if we've got this idea that foundational learning is about preparing us for particular futures or making a certain one of the things that's critical about the future is that we don't know what it's going to bring. It is unknown and uncertain. And under those circumstances, to standardize at a global level what we think everybody should learn is not just difficult to assess, but actually crazy. It is a crazy thing to do because it is reducing diversity. And one thing we know about resilience is you want difference. So, for example, there have been 500 years of attempts to eradicate indigenous knowledge. And yet we know when we look around at the moment that indigenous knowledge is the knowledge that will help us to work out how to live well in the world. We can see that all the biodiversity exists in these communities. So I suppose I have a question to the lovely quantitative scholars that we work with, or anybody else working with this, is how might we invent new systems that allow us to play this dance between standards and diversity, that allow us to say, actually, how do we actively value and make visible the difference of this knowledge so that we can really surface this? So it's not just about accounting for it, but it is about really bringing it to the surface. To me, I feel like we're at a moment where we need to start designing new systems So yeah, that's just a question back to my colleagues who've been working with this stuff for a while.
And I think actually this would be a good opportunity, a good place where Hita and Hineta, if you are there, if you could comment on the specific context and that you have worked on, please.
Obrigada pela oportunidade. Agradeço muito e foi muito enriquecedor ver todas as apresentações, né? Como os comentários de Kerry e de Hilda. Pensando, Kerry falou na sua fala e fechou com algo que é muito significativo, né? Que é para chamando a atenção das reflexões que são necessárias, né, dos sentidos para que a gente esteja vivo, né? As pessoas estejam vivas, né? E nós, povos indígenas, nós temos uma filosofia de que não basta só estar vivos, né? É preciso que a gente esteja vivendo bem, né? Que é o bem viver que nós projetamos, que nós lutamos por ele, não só para nós, povos indígenas, né, mas para todas as pessoas. O bem viver só faz sentido se for para todos e todas, inclusive os não humanos. Ao escutar as apresentações, né, a gente fica lembrando aqui das experiências de educação diferenciada que nós temos no Brasil, e aí a gente vê muitos pontos, né, de articulação, de interseção. Sobretudo, é notório, né, a insensibilidade, digamos assim, dos sistemas oficiais das políticas educacionais em não reconhecer a importância de ter um currículo que expresse, não é, a vida das pessoas, que esteja ligado à vida das pessoas, ao viver bem dessas pessoas. É impressionante como, tanto do ponto de vista legal, formal, como do ponto de vista da construção da política pública, ainda se pensa o currículo descolado da vida, não é? E isso, os Tremembé, né, de Almofala, os quais a gente trouxe aqui uma experiência para retratar o que a gente vem batalhando para implementar com política pública em nosso país, dessa educação diferenciada. E os Tremembé querem simplesmente ter uma articulação.
What we want is for schools to be linked with our lives, not a distant, disconnected school, but a school that is linked and connected to our way of being in the world, so that we can continue to be indigenous peoples in dialogue, in interaction with the school. It makes no sense to be indigenous in a school that's isolated from other types of knowledge. So we need schools that are intercultural. The Tremembé experience teaches us a lot, as Renata was saying in her video, important lessons, not just for our own indigenous schools, but also for non-indigenous schools. And this is what we draw everyone's attention to. Schools have to do with life. They have to act for the community and not be detached from it. If a school it's not linked to life and to community, it's an unschool, as we say. And we've been thinking a lot about all these processes, especially after the COVID pandemic, on the importance of life and how vulnerable, how ephemeral our life is. So I think the pandemic brought about many great challenges, and we have to continue to think about them and to face them, precisely through thinking of the importance of being alive and living well. This is what I wanted to tell you. And I give the floor to Renata. Maybe she wants to say something. Thank you, Rita, Carrie. Yes. Based on what Carrie was talking about, the friendship aspects, living together as a community. The schools that we've been studying the past 4 years in Flaxo, Brazil, they are indigenous schools, quilombola schools, rural schools, and schools in the northern border of Brazil in the Amazon forest. Those are schools that have that link with the community, which is what we've been arguing for. So they are territories where public policy is largely absent, the state is largely absent, as compared to large cities in Brazil. So schools there act as a reference center for the community. It's a place where people meet and they recognize themselves and each other there. So if the curriculum is closer to life in the community, that means the group can recognize themselves in the school curriculum. So as it's important for children and teenagers who are in school, they need to know the history of people, the history of how the territories has been occupied. They learn that in school. That's important for the community. So it's an important place. It's important for the community to have the school as a place where you debate that, so that you have a contact between what people learn when they go to school and the school has to learn about what people who go to the school can teach it. So it's an interaction between the school, the community, and the territory. So we've been dedicating time to research initiatives such as this. And I was talking about how urban schools in Brazil have been trying to learn as much as possible with those indigenous and quilombola schools and what they can offer. So I think that work contributes to all of that. So we can think about the connection between school and territory. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There are many questions that have been asked by the participants, and I think a lot of the comments that are made by our panelists have addressed them. And some of the questions are already answered in written forms by our panelists. Thank you so much for that. So one of the things that we are discussing now is about the inclusiveness, I think, to what extent we are including certain topics when we discuss foundational learning, but also when how those topics or how those contents actually are meaningful for those who are being taught. So I just would like to quickly go over one question from the chat box specifically, because it is about the 21st century curriculum. So the person asked, with global movement towards competence-based curriculum that sets multiple learners' outcomes in terms of characteristics and competencies / 21st century skills and requires schools and teachers to work towards all these set goal at every level of education, already covering all other than literacy and numeracy that are being argued here to be included in foundational learning. What's the relevance of this debate? What's the connection with the competence-based curriculum? So I invite all the panelists who have any comments or thoughts regarding this question. Feel free to raise your hand. So how is the discussion that we are having now here differs from the discussion regarding 21st century skill and how that has been discussed in education? Thank you.
Yeah, I think, in some ways I'm a bit of a skeptic when it comes to 21st century skills, because I don't know what they are. I don't know what is relevant now in the 20th century that wasn't relevant before. what wasn't relevant before that isn't relevant now. I'm sure there's new technologies and things, but if we're thinking about foundational skills, some of them might be quite similar. I know that Korea and a few other countries are doing foundational coding as part of their foundational skills. So I'm sure that would qualify for me possibly as a genuine 21st century skill, but I probably related to technology in that particular sense. But for me, the other skills that we think about foundational learning, that would have been relevant to any century and any level of education.
Thank you, Hugh. Are there any additional thoughts or comments? Yes, Melis.
Hi, everyone. I just want to also chip in a couple of things to what Hugh said. Actually, I very much agree with what we call competency-based skills, because there's a lot of critiques of that as well. So overall, what we think is that foundational learning isn't about getting certain skills, but also being very having this sets of critical skills. I know it sounds very cliche, but to be able to really engage with the global challenges that we have, to be able to analyze, to be able to, one of the important parts of the education is to contribute to the public good, right? So we have an awareness, a global consciousness and responsibility towards each other. And I'm always critical about to what extent competency-based skills really address this conundrum.
Thank you. Carrie?
So I suppose what I've always found challenging with the idea of 21st century skills is precisely the point Hugh has made, which is, well, it's actually thinking forwards. We don't know what the 21st century is going to bring. So that's a first point. But I suppose my slight concern with 21st century skills is that a lot of it came out of certain parts of the world and proceeded to say that there were a set of skills that everybody should adopt, that are standardized. So I think there is the same tension in that debate as there is here, which is around this tension between standardization and the flourishing of difference. And to me, this is just the most core question. How are we going to allow ourselves to have difference and diversity and speak to each other? So I suppose I wonder whether it's worth thinking about this in terms of kind of creating a relational approach. So it's not about having a globally standardized set of skills that we think is going to fix everything, but more about trying to find ways to bridge the relationship between different sets of knowledge and skills so that we can learn from each other. It's like a networked localism rather than a standard globalism. And for that to work, though, we need to do something which we don't do very often, which is to think about listening, is to think about how do we hear what other people are telling us. And again, this comes back to this issue of vulnerability to experience, openness to fallibility, openness to other people's ideas. I mean, we could go back to 1972. The Foray report says a lot of the things that we're saying now. So one of my critical questions with all of this, why has nothing changed? And I think one of the answers is that we actually need to listen. We need to embed listening to make connections between different sorts of differences, different sorts of knowledge, if we're going to make any progress.
Thank you so much for highlighting the importance of listening. And I think hopefully this issue at SI9 contributes to that discussion and emphasis on listening. Camille, could you share the slide? So based on the presentations and discussions we had in the webinar, I'm very excited to share that NSI 9 is now officially available on our website. You can read and download the NSI 9 using this QR code. I will pause shortly so that you can scan it. But even after this event, now the link to our publication is being shared in the chat box. So you can access the publication using that link directly as well. Or you can also access our NORRAG's website and you will be able to download or read it on our website as well. As you embark on this exploratory journey of foundational learning through the contributions included in NSI 9, we would like to invite you to reflect on and challenge your own assumptions, beliefs, and understandings, as Hugh pointed out in his introduction. We really hope that this special issue stimulates deeper and more critical discussions about foundational learning and among educators, learners, policymakers, researchers, and practitioners, contributing to the foundation for a brighter and promising future for all. And going back to Carrie's point earlier, we have had this type of discussion or similar discussion before then, why changes have not been made, right? So we need to start questioning our assumptions and think about what we can do better for the future for everyone. Next, please. I would like to remind you that NSI 9 was under the Education and SDG thematic focus of NORRAG. And we also have upcoming events in other thematic focuses of NORRAG. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Yes. The next event is on February 14th, the Missing Data and Inequality Summit. This summit will discuss key themes arising from the 5th book in the NORRAG series on international education and development. The title is Achieving Equitable Education, Missing Education Data, and the SDG4 Data Regime, published by Edward Elgar Publishing. This book critically explores education data gaps across regions, themes, and levels of education, and also highlights key relationships and disconnects between national, regional, and global data needs and uses of data under the SDG4 data regime. So you can scan this QR code for registration and check out the event page. I also would like to draw your attention to the South Also Knows initiatives. The South Also Knows initiative features the experts from the South in our network, as well as their work and scholarship. Through this initiative, we aim to contribute to reversing the north to south flow of expertise and decision-making. So please join our movement using this QR code right here and check our network map as well. Next, please. All participants after this event will receive follow-up emails with the event video recordings, event highlights, and the link to the publication. And you are already receiving the link to the publication in the chat. In the meantime, we also invite you to let us know how we can improve the next event by filling in the evaluation form. The survey is also available in Portuguese. So if you speak in Portuguese, please check out the survey at the Portuguese version. And also you can join the NORRAG network by registering as a member. The link to the surveys are currently being shared in the chat box too, so you can already access them now. So that said, once again, thank you, speakers, participants, organizing team at NORRAG, and the wonderful interpreters very much for your time and contribution. Thank you so much. Have a great day.